I have lots of memories about this show. Mr. Ed, it was such a great TV program from my youth. I've always been something of a sucker for those talking animal movies and TV shows, so Mr. Ed, well, it was right up my alley. Still, whenever I think about this show, I remember that night that I first learned about Mr. Ed's passing. Way back in 1979, Saturday Night Live of all places. Apparently the horse that had played Mr. Ed had died, and as a gag, SNL interviewed his grieving widow as part of their Weekend Update sketch. The only problem with that report, as well as the actual news reporting from the day, was that Mr. Ed was already dead. There are various reports as to how long he had been gone. Most think that it was somewhere between 6 and 9 years. Yep, it turns out that the horse that died way back in 1979 was Pumpkin, a horse that had posed as Mr. Ed in many of the TV show's publicity stills. That horse had lived much longer than Bamboo Harvester, the horse who actually co-starred with Alan Young in that classic TV series that ran for 6 seasons beginning in 1961. We'll talk more about Bamboo Harvester's actual passing in just a moment, but first, just a couple of quick tidbits about the origin of the show. Mr. Ed actually debuted in the pages of Liberty magazine way back in 1937 in a series of short stories written by Walter Brooks, who is also credited with the creation of Freddie the Talking Pig, who was the main character in a series of 26 children's books written by Brooks between 1927 and 1958. The producers of Mr. Ed had actually wanted to adapt the Francis the Talking Mule movies for television, but when they couldn't obtain the rights, they opted for Mr. Ed. One more thing worth mentioning is that the great George Burns helped provide financing for the Mr. Ed pilot. Growing up, I didn't understand what a creative force for comedic good George Burns actually was. To me, way back then, he was just some old guy who showed up in movies as the Almighty. Now I know better. Much better. So let's get back to Bamboo Harvester, the horse who actually starred with Alan Young on the show. What happened? How did he die and when? Well, according to Alan Young himself, it likely happened in 1973, although others say the actual year was 1970. In his book, Mr. Ed and Me, Young says that Les Hilton, the horse's owner, was out of town visiting relatives, and a temporary caregiver might have seen Bamboo Harvester rolling on the ground, struggling to get up. Young said that Harvester was a heavy horse and he was not always strong enough to get back on his feet without struggling. Young believes that the caregiver may have thought that the horse was in distress and decided to give him some sort of tranquilizer to settle him down a bit. And for reasons that no one really understands, even to this day, Bamboo Harvester was gone shortly thereafter. The remains of the horse were cremated and scattered by the horse's owner, Les Hilton, in the Los Angeles area at a spot known only to him. So that's Alan Young's version of the story. Like I said, there are other versions that say that Bamboo Harvester was suffering from age-related ailments and was euthanized with no publicity and buried on a farm in Oklahoma. Whatever version you choose to believe is true, what is certain is that the horse that died in 1979 was not Mr. Ed. That magnificent horse, who along with Alan Young and Connie Hines gave us so many wonderful laughs, well, he'd been gone for quite a while. There's a monument that you can find in Oklahoma. It doesn't say that the horse that played Mr. Ed was buried there, although the marker was erected due to another version of the story where Bamboo Harvester becomes sick all the way back in '68 and was euthanized before being laid to rest near a cherry tree in 1970. The stone itself doesn't make any sort of claim as to whether or not the horse buried there was the actual star of the show. Instead, it cautiously and simply remembers a wonderful show and its amazing star. So there you go. If I'm going to pick a version to believe, I guess I'll go with the one told by Alan Young. Now let's close with one last pick of Wilbur and Mr. Ed. I only caught this show in reruns, Saturday afternoons paired with Hee Haw. Seems about right, don't you think? Alright, now it's your turn. Please share your memories in the comments section, and while you're at it, I would appreciate a thumbs up. And what the heck, why not subscribe to my little YouTube channel? I talk about music, movies, and television, mostly from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. You know, the good stuff. But most importantly, and as always, thank you so much for watching.